Welcome back to the Act 2 podcast, a podcast for the real-life working screenwriter. I'm Tasha Hugh.
And I'm Josh Hallman.
And as a reminder, Act 2 is a network and support group for the everyday working screenwriter. That's you. So this podcast is just one of our many initiatives we do. Thank you for joining us here. We also have a mentorship. We also have a Patreon. We also have an email. You could just email us questions and topic suggestions, or just tell us how things are going with you as a writer. And you can do that at ActTwoWriters@gmail.com, all spelled out, or on our Instagram and Twitter at ActTwoWriters. I am Story Thursday on Instagram and Tasha 3.0 on Twitter.
I'm Joshua Hallman on Twitter, Josh Hallman on Instagram. Tasha, I'm just going into it.
Go.
I know this isn't what this episode is for, but the Tomb Raider trailer came out.
Yeah.
And it's freaking awesome.
Yeah, thank you. I'm glad you liked it.
It is freaking awesome. So I just wanted to say it's great, and I'm very excited to watch Tomb Raider.
I can't wait for you to watch it. Has Amelia seen the trailer?
Not yet. I got home a little late last night, and I haven't. No. In short, I have not showed her.
This is the real opinion that matters. No
yeah.
offense.
No, you don't want her opinion. Those kids' opinions kind of hurt more than adult opinions.
That trailer is butt.
That is okay. Can I go watch Transformers?
Seems boring.
Yeah. The kid thing hurts, but it looks great. I'm very excited.
Thank you.
I was just saying to you, I don't know if there's any Easter eggs. I don't need Easter eggs. I think it's gonna be freaking awesome. I know nothing about the Tomb Raider universe, but I do know about action and adventure. And it hits my sweet spot.
Yeah. It's in I was gonna nerd out for a second. Is that okay?
Nerd out. That's what we're here for.
It's interesting you said that, because the games that came out in 2013, there are a series of 3 games that told Lara Croft's origin story. They were also really good at getting people who had no interest in playing Tomb Raider back in the day into the game, and they got a ton of new fans. So hopefully, now that you said that, my new dream is that brings new people in to the show, to the character who have never played a game in their life, and they're like, oh shit, maybe I'll check out the video game, and even the mobile game, whatever, just because this is a fun character I want to be with more.
I remember playing the game when I was younger. When it first came out. Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Oh, yeah. That first iteration of what was on, PlayStation or something?
In the 90s, yeah.
In the 90s. And I played it, but that's because I played video games. I was playing with, Crash Bandicoot and, Tomb Raider and stuff. And I honestly, I really loved it. And I know Lara Croft has taken on kind of a myth of her own, I guess, in the way people think she should look and the way she should act and all these different things. But I'm not just saying this to sound this way, but I genuinely was playing it just because I was like, cool, this is a video game that has action in it.
Right. Well, I could keep going on that, but I'm not gonna. I would be like a Tomb Raider history nerd for a second, but that's not what this episode is about.
That's not what this episode is. However, in the coming episodes, I'm just letting everyone know, because we're in the proximity of Tomb Raider. There's going to be a lot of Tomb Raider centric stuff happening.
I think I'm excited about that, because as a writer, I think there's so much to learn about the process of making the sausage in this scenario, that I love the opportunity for people to ask a ton of questions, writing questions, creative questions. How the hell did this happen? How did you decide on this story? Or the background, talk about anything. I can bring some of the animators on, the director on. We can talk about the animation if we want. We can dive in, because we have this awesome podcast, and I feel like we don't often get to deep dive into a movie or a show or whatever, because if you get a podcast, it's an episode, right? You get to interview the showrunner once, but we can talk. And it's not a narcissistic thing. It's really just a craft thing. It's really cool that we have this opportunity. So hopefully it should be fun.
Move over, Halloween. October's something else now. Got to take a back seat. Okay.
This week's in writings?
This week in writing.
This week in writing.
Tasha, This is just a healthy reminder, something I go through often. I've probably talked about this before on This Week in Writing. I was writing a script and I was stumped, just like this. I have everything outlined, and I started to get into this script and I was just writing something down. And you know when you start writing and you're like, this just isn't right.
Yeah.
And you can you either stop or you kind of power through. Mm-hmm. And I do both, to be totally honest. Like I tell myself I want to just kind of keep pushing through, but sometimes I do stop and I'm like, something's not right. I'm going to waste my time just writing these words.
Yeah.
However, I caught myself, like I wrote like 2 scenes and I was like, something like the pacing's wrong. It's different. It's the same as my outline, but something just wasn't working.
Oh, that's also the worst. Okay, sorry, keep going.
No, it is. You're like, wait a minute, I just outlined this entire thing. I ended up going back in and as I was reading the bad stuff, I was like, oh, wait a minute. I know the way into this and I know how this should be and how this pacing should go and how the flow should go and how these characters and like it's not too boring. This is, and it was just that reminder of getting something on the page, no matter what, even if it's in an outline, even if it's in a document or on your script, but you just have to get something down in order to know what isn't working because it's different when it lives in your head. And that was just my reminder that I always have this reminder.
Yes.
And I just had to bring it up again.
Not to steal your This Week in Writing.
Steal it.
And feel like a hack, but I have a similar This Week in Writing where I'm working on something right now and it started as one thing and now it's something completely different, but it required all of the bad versions in between. And what's really, really hard is you feel like, especially if you're doing this with a producer, it's a job, like you feel like you're not actually working. Because I think what people think our job is, and that includes producers and studio execs who are actually in our job, in our industry, they think what our job is to just go write the thing. They sort of don't realize that actually in that week where we're writing the thing, it's also research. It's also sitting and staring at a wall and thinking through things. It's also writing an entire outline and being like, oh, fuck, that doesn't work. Shit. All right, well, now I need to rethink that. And so by the time you get to Wednesday, you've actually done a shit ton of work, even though you have nothing to show for it.
Yeah.
And it's so many bad ideas. So I've definitely been going through that too. And what's interesting to me, and I'm curious if you felt this as you were coming through it, is that I was so angry. I hated it. I'm the worst writer ever. Why can't I figure this out? And then I started to, the bad ideas were peeling away. Like I could see the good ideas through it and like, because I was narrowing in on what it actually was. And there was like a bright light was singing at me. Like I could see it in the distance and I'm not there yet, but I know that the better movie is ahead and required all this like filtering through first.
Absolutely. You can sense it. You know it's coming. And then you have to like take a beat to just kind of catch yourself like, is that it? That's it. And you just know. It's the greatest feeling.
Yeah. Can I say I feel dumb for not coming up with the light version from the start. And I think it's because I feel like there are other writers out there who they can just get to that amazing idea first without all the bullshit in between. And I'm sure that is an unfair thing to put upon myself.
I feel the same way.
But it's an insecurity I have that I need to get over.
I feel like everyone goes through the same thing, the struggle, the drafts. Yeah. Maybe, I hope, or maybe it just takes time and then just kind of really figuring out what works and what doesn't.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's just the kind of writer I am. Because there are some writers who are so good at like just blowing shit up and coming up with a completely radical idea that's just, you're just like, whoa, like how did your brain even go in that direction? Mm-hmm. And I'm not typically that kind of writer. It really is a lot of this process that you're talking about. And I think you're right. Like most writers, there's like a 1% of people who are not like this. And I think I just wish that I was 1%, which is why I get upset.
I understand. I feel the same way. Yeah. It's such a strange feeling when, you know, you're in a early draft and you're like, sure, that's what it is. Like there's no talking you back. Like, yeah, this is it. I see it so clearly. And then as the process goes on, that changes. And all of a sudden, that's not it. and it's like being in love with someone and then all of a sudden being like, how was that? That was like the worst decision of my life.
Yeah.
You're like, I never thought I would not like that person, and all of a sudden you're just like on to the next, and you have a new version.
That's exactly how it feels, because you feel like you know this version, and this is right. It's so good, and then perspective, and you're like, ugh, that relationship was shit. They were mean to me.
Just the last thing I'll say is I fear that on the flip side of this is just never being satisfied, because there's a part of you that always wonders, is there something better? Is there a better version of this that I haven't hit quite yet?
Every author has said this, but I feel like more iconically, I think it was Melville who said that like his novels are never done. He just has to publish them. And I think that's right. But that is also part of our job, is getting to a place where like, it's good enough to go out into the world. Because yes, you could tweak forever and your thing will never get made. Or you could tweak until it's so good, but not perfect. Like I'm assuming Chris Nolan watches his movies and goes, man, I wish that I had time to have gotten that right. Or man, now that I see that, this would have been the better way into that scene. I'm assuming just because that's art, and like it changes and you change and you get perspective. And last thing I'm going to say about this is, when I was talking about the 1%, I had someone particular in my mind, and I just now remembered that person, I'm aware of a story about that person that I was thinking of where he struggled very hard to find the right version of a movie that he was doing. So even the 1% doesn't exist, and it's all in our head.
Boom.
All right, I guess that's my only this week in writing. For now, that's sort of the biggest one that I've been dealing with Wait, no.
Oh, uh-oh.
Okay, one more. I yelled at my manager this week.
Oh my God. Never a good start to a story.
It feels like a big deal, because I don't yell, first of all, and I don't yell at her. And it wasn't, I was not mad at her. I was just yelling because she was delivering information that I didn't want to hear.
Stop talking.
She was telling me about, there's this producer I'm working with on a show, and I thought I was done with a draft of something. And she calls me and she says, they don't like what you did. And they want you to not only do it over, but they want a series of meetings so that you make like the pilot better. And I just started yelling because I was mad. I was mad that all the hard work I'd done, they didn't like or appreciate. I was mad that I had to do more work because I was tired. And I just didn't like that process that she was telling me they wanted. And so I just started yelling at her, and she was so quiet. She was like, well, Tasha, you could walk away from it if you want, or you could just find a way to do it. And I'm telling this story because then I spent the entire evening after that, because I don't like being mad. And when I'm mad, there's an underlying reason to why I'm mad, and that's what needs to get solved, not the thing I think needs to get solved when I'm mad. So I realized the underlying thing was that my expectations of how this pilot writing was going to go when I first did the job is different than how it's going now. And like that made me angry, because I was like, they're not doing what I want them to be doing.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, but and like, this is just the way it is. So adjust, or you're just going to be angry and resentful. And so to me, that is a good writing lesson, is expectations. If you have the expectations that something is going to go a certain way and it's not, and you're on a job, for instance, or you're working with a producer to develop something, I think instead of being angry and aggressive and defensive, try and figure out how you can adjust your expectations so that you can work with this person, because you're working with this person. Like, that's not going to change tomorrow unless you don't want the money, or unless you don't want to develop with this person. Those are your two options. So might as well go in with a good headspace. And interestingly, I then got feedback later in the week, like, oh, the producer who's working with you on this pilot, like, they really love how like flexible you are and how kind you are, because the other writers they're working with get really angry and defensive. I was like, oh, okay.
Nice.
So my first reaction is, common. But B, like, that's great. Like that proves that work was really useful.
Those other writers need a better manager they can yell at. So they don't yell at the wrong person.
I think that's right.
Wow. All right,
cool. Let's get into our topic, which came from, I sat down with a recent college grad who wanted to get into the industry. And I sort of realized a few things in talking to her, which was that, and we all do this, we come out of college and we're like, we learned so much in the last 4 to 6 years. And I love all of it. I just love the film industry and I want to be a part of all of it. And because we take classes in everything, we love everything. This woman came out of her program and she's like, I want to be a non-writing EP showrunner. I also love marketing and I want to be in marketing and, create activations and trailers, and which, by the way, is definitely how I came out of college. I loved trailers. I wanted to do them and hoped that whatever writing job I got in the future allowed me to do that.
Same, actually.
Really? They're
yeah,
just
I love
so
trailers.
Great.
Yeah.
And here we are now. So I think I had to sort of explain to her that those jobs there's not a job that exists where you are in a writer's room as a showrunner, non-writing, but also creating trailers and activations. That job doesn't exist unless you are, like, again, the 1%. Like, it's not, and this is also the cool thing about our business. There are no no's. Like, you could technically be all of that. That is just a very long road. And so it just got me thinking with Josh, so that maybe it's worth discussing some of the reality of the jobs, especially as you're coming out of college, and kind of the general paths to those jobs. And we're not going to talk about all the jobs, just like kind of the top 4 or 5 or whatever.
Yeah. So this person you met with, which I think I was the exact same way. It's like, wants to be in the show running without writing, kind of just telling people what to do.
Yeah, she wants to be a producer, but
Gotcha.
Loves working with writers, loves working on scripts, and just loves creating, but she herself doesn't want to write, doesn't feel like she's a writer.
I'm going to sprinkle a little positive on that comment.
Let's go.
At least she wants to be in the industry, and it sounds like there's a lot going on there, and she's probably going to end up taking the producer path, and she's probably going to end up loving it.
Mm-hmm. That's what I said to her. So let's just jump into that one, I guess.
Yeah.
A showrunner of a TV show, if that's your dream, you are definitely a writer first. You've gotten the showrunner job because you have proven to a studio, network, whoever, that you are a fantastic writer. And more than that, that you have leadership skills. Now, we've all heard of the nightmare scenarios of terrible writers' rooms that were poorly led. So it's not like people who don't have leadership skills don't sneak in there, because you can always fake it in a meeting. But those are generally the two things that people look at before they hire you. Mm-hmm. And part of the writing skill that you need to have as a showrunner is to have a vision for not just how the pilot's going to go, or not just like general vision of how story works, but how your show will function over the course of not just 1 season, but potentially 7 seasons. What is your 7-season plan for your show? And if that makes sense to people, that's how you often get in that room. It requires usually a ton of experience. I say usually because I got my first show running job on Tomb Raider after having only been a staff writer on a TV show. However, I had been working in the industry as a TV writer at creating my own pilots that I had sold to Amazon, and also writing movies. So I had been in the industry developing actively, building a network, understanding what notes mean, all the things I've been putting in that work for 2000 is when I got the Tomb Raider job.
Wait, what? 2000?
Yeah, 2020. Oh my God. I don't know what year we're in. 2020 is when I got that job. So I had been professionally writing for 6 years at that point, but had been in the business trying for 10 years at that point. So I guess that's
quick side note. I remember when you got the Tomb Raider job, we were in writers group.
Yeah. And I got like an email or something.
I think you got a phone call. And we were Zooming at the time because of COVID. Or we were maybe just lazy. And I remember very vividly you getting that phone call and sending a message during writers group. And you were like, I was like, oh, cool. I didn't understand. It was like I was like, wait, what? Her reaction would be much different if this was like a show running job. You're just, and then we just continued on with writers group.
I just came back to writers. So you're like, oh, this wasn't probably a real job.
Yeah, like, maybe she was just making this up the entire time. And then I was like, wait, you're show running it? And you're like, yes. I was like, what the fuck? We continued giving notes for like an hour. Anyway.
I'm not good at like taking in and celebrating good things. So
I witnessed it in real time.
It is a flaw.
I lost track. I was just thinking about the day.
Showrunner, non-EP. So,
right.
Or non-writing EP. So for this young lady who is clearly very bright and very talented, wanting to be a non-writing executive producer, showrunner, that doesn't actually work, because if you are running a show, you are, and we've talked about this at length, so I'm not going to go super into it. Look at our previous episodes if you don't know what I'm talking about. We talk about show running, what it's like to be in a writer's room, etc. So if you are a showrunner, you are running the room. So it's a bunch of writers that you are directing to the story. You are breaking it with them, meaning we're literally talking about every single scene, how it leads to the next one, how every episode leads to the next one, etc. So you have to have a really strong handle on story. But on top of that, as scripts start to come in, you need to rewrite them, and rewriting. You're rewriting constantly. You're rewriting when you're in production. You're rewriting when you're in post. You're rewriting. So if you're not a writer, being a showrunner doesn't really work. However, you could be a co-showrunner who doesn't write, or a non-writing executive producer who just is in the room but not a showrunner. That is all possible. However, it is rare. And the way to get there requires, again, a similar amount of trust built upon experience that someone would allow you to be in the room in that way.
Yeah.
It is possible. For instance, I'm aware of situations where actors who may own an IP, they come in and they say, I will only allow you, Amazon, for instance, to have this IP if I am an executive producer in the room. And they're not the showrunner. There is also a showrunner. However, this non-writing actor, executive producer still has a lot of sway in that writer's room in terms of what story is told and what is not. That can get very tricky, though, because, again, you do not know story the way that a writer does. So I started talking to this girl about this, and then I said, however, there is a job that is a non-writing executive producer, but you're not in the writer's room. However, your job would then be to work very closely with the showrunner. So again, that showrunner gets these outlines and gets these scripts in from their writers, and then they start rewriting so that the show feels cohesive. And then that showrunner often works very closely with an executive producer to get notes from that person, to hone the script with that person, and to just creatively like use them as a partner.
Like a creative producer.
And she was like, yes, exactly. And she was like, oh, that's actually what I want to do. It's like, yes. Because she loves working with writers. So if you are someone who maybe you do love to write, but you maybe don't think you have what it takes to do it professionally, that's okay, because the best producers that we have in this business are the ones who like have that creative bug, right? Because they can help you with story in a really great way. Like my manager is not a writer, but she knows stories so much, and she tries to get in there. Like on her, she'll be like, I wrote this story about such and such today, and it's like, oh, you're writing, but you obviously don't want to do this professionally. So it's important to have that skill, but you might just be better suited to be a producer working with other writers.
Yeah.
That's all.
Should we discuss how to become a producer?
Let's do it.
producer is such a weird thing because I feel like even now, you're like, how do you become a producer? Like there's no specific path, but there kind of is, depending on if you like get a job and if you're working at Universal or you're working at a studio or whatever it is, and maybe you start overseeing certain projects and then you become an independent producer, and like that, just there's like a path, I guess, to do that. But I do know people who are independent, and I know people who have had money and have become producers and then have become producers on things that didn't have money, or people who just had IP, or people who just knew the writer and just stayed attached as a producer. There's a lot of different roads to that job. And it's very confusing because for years I was like, how do you become a producer? I don't understand what anyone does.
Yeah.
I don't know if you felt that same way, but
I feel that way every day.
like I actually have a friend who I met, and this was like 6 years ago, and he was like, I'm a creative producer. And I was like, please explain that to me. Like, how did you become what does that mean exactly? How's that different from every other producer? And he was basically what you just described. Like, he understood story a little bit, and he could come in and give notes, but and people trusted him. But and that seems like the best version of a producer to me, at least. Obviously,
as writers, for sure, it's so much more helpful. And it's interesting that often that creative producer, it's not like an official title. Like the creative is almost just like an adjective there rather than a title. They are just producers, but there are some that are so creative and so good at story that you're right, they are trusted. And that's often why they're hired or get deals at places, because holy shit, they take the onus off of the studio executives who are more business minded and more kind of number crunchers. And they can work with the writer to get the project in the right state it needs to be greenlit and greenlit effectively. And that is a huge relief, because often studio executives, they might be able to be like, hey, I feel something is wrong here. And it's all the jokes we have about the terrible studio exec notes. It's because that's not necessarily their strength story. Their strength is managing. Their strength is budgets, financing, attaching people, having a network that trusts and loves them, and, you know, building relationships and just getting things made in a very practical way. That doesn't always include being creative with a writer. So sometimes they're separated. If you're so lucky, they're combined in one person, but these are all producing options. And I know plenty of, and you've worked with people who are producers, but they also write their own specs, and like sometimes have been on the blacklist. And I remember I worked with a producer who's now a showrunner, and that she's like living her dream. And it can kind of be all combined. And a lot of people figure it out as they go, which I think is both scary and good news for all of you out there. If you start to get into a producerial role and you're like, oh shit, I want to write, that doesn't mean you can't write. That's all possible, and vice versa.
Yeah.
And it's also a cool thing about our job.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I know plenty of writers who have it'd be like the equivalent to me being like, Tasha, I have this really good idea, or this idea that I think is really good, and you like it, and you're like, I'll help you develop this. Let's talk about it. I'm going to be a producer on it. You go with God and write it.
Yeah.
Like, all right, cool. Like that happens all the time with all the time. I know.
And as you said there, you can be a producer just because you attach an actor, and suddenly you're the producer on that, and that steamrolls into now you're a producer in other places because people saw that you had a producer credit. But as you said at the beginning, in terms of if you want to be a producer, what is the path? Again, there are a million paths, but a very traditional path is finding an internship or a job at a production company. Usually those are easier to get than a studio, and then you can kind of work your way up to potentially a studio level where they usually want people with a bit more experience. But production companies, especially if they're smaller, often kind of get whoever they can because it's less of a rush to try to get those jobs, but you can still learn a ton. Also, working at an agency can be very important if you work in the right part of it, like literary or talent, because that teaches you more directly the mechanics of how our jobs work and what people are looking for, buyers and how people talk to each other in our business. So those are sort of the most direct ways, I think, to be a producer. And then also PAing that on a set. A lot of producers I have found actually don't have set experience the same way that nowadays showrunners often don't. Just because they kind of do this version of interning, working at a desk at a production company, and then suddenly they're a studio exec, but they've never actually been on set. So if you have said experience and you're a PA, that's also a really great way to excel on the production side.
It is wild. There's no one. They're like, there's traditional paths, like you said, which are probably the highest percentage. But then you meet somebody else who you admire beyond belief, and you're like, that's exactly who I want to be. What was your path? And that path was not not traditional at all. And they're like, yeah, I started as a writer and then whatever, and so
yeah,
it's crazy.
Yeah, I love talking to people about their stories because it's always bonkers.
Me too. So I guess those are those are the pathway to showrunner, kind of talking a little bit about producer. We know about how to become a writer because that's what this podcast is, of course. But I think just kind of bringing this full circle, bringing this back to your initial meeting, we just needed to touch on the path to becoming, a showrunner or producer or an executive or wherever it may be within the Hollywood system. We could do multiple episodes, like diving a lot deeper, but I don't know if we've touched on this before. So I think this is it. I think this is all we need to do.
Yeah, I think so too. And it's good because we all have these huge dreams that encompass everything because we love the business so much. And it's good to kind of understand that there are lanes to be in, but also please understand that you can blow up the lane system entirely. That is not impossible. Just know that the reality and the difficulty in doing that exists because there are these traditional paths that we just discussed. So, because I never want to tell anyone that nothing's possible.
Yeah, you can't do that.
Dream big, baby.
Dream big. Anyway, that's it. Tasha, bring us home. I think we're good.
Quote of the day.
Quote of the day.
Don't write it right. Just write it and then make it right later. Stephen King. Please remember to rate and subscribe. Follow us at ActTwoWriters for more awesome writing stuff. You can follow me, Tasha, at Story Thursday on Instagram or on Twitter at Tasha 3.0.
I'm Joshua Hallman on Twitter, Josh Hallman on Instagram.
And as always, the Act Two podcast is a production of Act Two, a network and support group for the everyday working screenwriter. This episode was edited by Paul Lundquist.